It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon Podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, Jon, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It could be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later.
Hello, and thank you for downloading this latest episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. This is the podcast that is going through every episode and tie-in to Babylon 5, the classic 1990s sci-fi drama, 30 years after it was released. My name is John Wilson, and with me every episode on this journey is my good friend and Babylon 5 expert, Mr. Blaine Dowler. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Not sure I'd call myself an expert. I know there are people out there who know way more than I do.
There's always somebody who knows more, even if you're an expert. As for me, I know nothing. This is my first journey through this series. We are long past anything I have tried watching before in this show, so every episode has been new for me. And today, we are talking about the episode entitled Eyes, as in the eyes in your head if you look at the spelling. But it could be the letter I's if you're just making the puns. So it was aired on July 13th, 1994. So we are coming at you on July 13th, 2024. Moseying through the summer, Star Trek is on hiatus. Deep Space Nine has finished its second season. Next Generation is off the air and making a movie. There are rumors of a new TV show starting in January, but this is not a Star Trek podcast. It's the Babylon 5 podcast. And yeah. Should we talk about, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Should we talk about who's in this, or should we dive into a plot?
We usually do the ident card with the episode title, air date, writer, director. When it comes to the guest cast, we haven't really been consistent on that. Sometimes we talk about them when they come up in the plot summary. Sometimes we do it in advance.
Okay, well, according to IMDb, this was directed by Jim Johnston and written by, of course, JMS, with Larry DeTilio as a story editor. I have found that those are not always the most accurate credits, but we've seen Jim Johnston a number of times by this point.
That we have, yes.
All right. So this episode, most of the time they have an A plot and a B plot. This primarily has one plot with like 5 minutes of scenes giving a couple characters something else to do. So it's really just one main plot, but we'll come back to the secondary plot at the end. Two men come to Babylon 5. And at first, they're going under pseudonyms, but we quickly find out that these two men are Colonel Ari Ben-Zane of the Internal Investigations Department in Earth Force, and Harriman Gray, who is a member of the Psi Corps, who has been assigned as Ben-Zane's, adjutant. And they are here to investigate Babylon 5. They are basically going through all of the plot points of all of the episodes, wondering why Sinclair has been doing all of these things over the years, or the year and change that he's been in command. And they're going to investigate it, and they're going to scan all of the command staff. Ivanova does not take too kindly to this. She has always on this show showed a large aversion to the Psi Corps and to its members and to its methods. We find out that at least part of that, I'm not entirely convinced it's all of it, but at least part of it is that she has some very dear memories of her mother. Her mother was Psi-talented, and when her mother shared her mind with her, she could feel her mother's love coming back to her, and that was just a very special memory and sensation. She's like, there's no way anybody's going to, dive into my head and deal with that or access that. So she resigns her commission. She turns in her resignation to Sinclair rather than be subject to a mind scan as a member of Babylon 5's command staff. She resigns her commission. Sinclair does not accept because he has been examining the regulations and he has found a way around the dictates of internal investigations, who, by the way, since that's II, that's how they get the nickname Eyes. Also, there's probably lots of other ways that eyes can be applied to people who are always snooping around and doing stuff that, and investigating other people. So when Ben Zane calls Sinclair to a hearing with Harriman Gray present, Sinclair says, nope, we can talk, but not with your Psi Corps member here because, and he cites regulations that basically stipulate that unless there are very specific charges brought, they cannot be scanned. Investigations cannot use scans as a blanket to test loyalty of the officers. So Ben Zane's like, okay, whatever. And he eventually decides to turn things around so that it makes Sinclair look like he's unfit for command. He relieves Sinclair of duty and he takes over command of the station, which means everything that Ivanova was not wanting, everything that Sinclair was trying to avoid is now back on the table as far as scans go. Turns out the only reason he's able to go this far is because he has the authority of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sinclair's immediate commanders are not behind this. This is from much higher up. Somebody is on Babylon 5's case. So for a short while of the episode, it's basically under a dictatorial regime. In any case, Sinclair eventually, whenever he and Ivanova and Garibaldi are once again brought up to a hearing and now having to answer specific charges and now subject to mind scans, Sinclair mentions to Gray, maybe you're scanning the wrong person, because he and Garibaldi had had a conversation about how Ben Zane had been high on the list for command of Babylon 5. We found out a few episodes ago that Sinclair was really not even on that list, or if he was on the list, he was way down on the list. And the only reason that Sinclair was given command of the station is because the Minbari, that was a condition of the peace with the Minbari, is that Sinclair be given command of the station. So when Ben Zane didn't get command, he basically secretly decided to go on a crusade against Sinclair. We don't see him in this episode, but Walter Koenig's character, Alfred Bester, who we do get a last name from in this because he was just Alfred before, now he's Alfred Bester. No. He was Mr. Bester before. He was always Bester. We just had got a first name from him, right? I got my name switched.
Yeah, the first name comes out in a later novel.
Yeah, so Mr. Bester, he helped Ben Zane pull the strings to come after Sinclair. He assigned Gray as a Psi Corps. There's a word for whenever you're just helping somebody out that I keep on forgetting. That's what I'm saying, adjutant, because that's not the right word. But anyways, assistant, that's the word, as an assistant. And so Sinclair at the hearing tells Gray that maybe he's scanning the wrong person. Whenever Ben Zane says that everyone now is subject to scans of this hearing, Sinclair points out, well, that includes you too, because you are now command staff of Babylon 5. So as you're asking questions and I'm answering, maybe Gray should be scanning you too. And Ben Zane starts to lose it. He starts to get so angry, and Sinclair's pushing his buttons. And Gray is scanning him the entire time, while Ben Zane rants and raves about how he fought and he led commands in mission after mission, in campaign after campaign. He has visible facial scars and obviously emotional scars from all of that military experience, and he deserved command of the station, and he resents deeply that it was given to Sinclair. And as he's saying all of this, Gray is scanning him, realizing that a lot of what he had been told about their mission here was lies. And he calls Ben Zane on it. So Ben Zane, realizing that he's standing alone in this room, he pulls a weapon on the officers. And so Gray sends a mental impulse of pain against Ben Zane, which knocks him out. And that basically resolves the situation. Ivanova was able to get past without getting scanned. Sinclair is once again reinstated in command. There's a couple scenes where Ivanova and Gray are able to get a little bit past Ivanova's resentment of the Psi Corps, because Gray is a very affable person. He's obviously a little bit socially awkward. He's unassuming. He means well. He's just a member of an organization that is really not looked well upon. And so although Ivanova doesn't like what he represents even the slightest bit, they're able to come to a little bit of an accord. through the course of the episode. What else? The secondary plot line involves Bill Mumi's character, the assistant to the ambassador, whose name is
Lanier.
Lanier, yes. So Lanier, he sees Garibaldi doing a little hobby he has where he's working on an old motorcycle. And he's like, I don't understand. This is Earth stuff that's weird and bizarre, and I don't get it. And Garibaldi's like, yeah, well, that's fine. I was hoping I'd get a little bit of help with this because this manual is in Japanese and I can't understand it. And I want to, rebuild and repair this thing to bring it up to specs. And Lanier's like, well, perhaps I can study the manual and be of some assistance. So he takes the manual and he does some research on motorcycles and their like role in culture and basically how like they're sort of like the man's vehicle. There's even a part where he's like, ooh, a symbol of sexual prowess and masculinity. And he works on the bike while Garibaldi's involved in the storyline. At the end of the episode, he has done it. He has completely repaired and restored the bike. And at first, Garibaldi's a bit put off. He's been a little bit annoyed by Lanier's enthusiasm throughout the episode. Whenever Lanier has finished the bike without him, at first he's like really annoyed. And Lanier, who is of course always so like, introverted and socially awkward, thinks that Garibaldi is really mad at him, doesn't like him, and, gets sad. But then Garibaldi's like, no. This is good. And they start riding it around the station in a series of effects shots that I'm not sure entirely work. But yeah, they start riding this motorcycle up and down the corridors of the station, which is pretty fun. And that's basically Eyes.
Mm-hmm.
We had 2 guest stars in the episode. Colonel Ari Ben-Zain was played by Gregory Paul Martin, a name that I don't recognize. But as I look him up, it says he's known for Memoirs of an Invisible Man, A Walk in the Clouds, Tyr Lear, and Strange Days. I'm looking through his list of credits, and he's in a lot of stuff that I haven't seen. It looks like he stopped acting after 1996, and there was in just like a handful of roles after that. So he did have a role on one episode of The Real Ghostbusters. He was a Ghostmaster, so he did a voice on that. I don't know if that episode was written by JMS or not. But the much more notable guest star is Jeffrey Combs as Harriman Gray. Now, this is before his series of appearances on Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, which is what he's largely known for. But he does already have at this point a long list of both voice and face acting. He was in the Reanimator movies, of course, which I think is what he was best known for at this point. But he would, of course, go to play a series of roles on the various Star Treks. He was one of our main Dominion Point man on Deep Space Nine. He was the main Andorian character on Enterprise. And my brother got me an autographed picture of him once when he was at a convention. He saw Jeffrey Combs, got to meet him, and had him sign an autograph to me. So that's one of my things that I have as a memorial of my brother. So, yeah, I love seeing Jeffrey Combs on stuff. He was a surprise to see here. And, yeah.
Yeah, I would say he's more than a surprise. He's a pleasant surprise.
Yes.
Because, yes, as you say, this is his only Babylon 5 appearance. So unlike other people who've been on both, who I strongly associate with B5 because the character work here is going to be so incredible by the time it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Combs it's Wayun, it's Shran, it's the Star Trek roles for me that will always have that association with him.
They were just so running and so emblematic of his performance. And, it's not that he does a bad job here. He's Jeffrey Combs. He does an amazing job here. And I really liked how he presented Gray. I really liked how he interacted with Ivanova and how you could tell that he really didn't enjoy the kind of thing he represented as a member of Psi Corps. But here he is, he's a member of Psi Corps, and his entire career got abandoned because he had to do this.
Yeah, and I do like the fact that when Sinclair was quoting the regulations that Ben-Zane is not a fan of, Jeffrey Combs' character Gray was in there going, no, I believe Commander Sinclair is correct. Those are the regulations. These are the rules. So he has, as of the limited number of Psi Corps people we've met, he does appear to be the most honorable.
We certainly have been given a impression of Psi Corps in general that he belies, that he does not, represent, which is good. It's good to know that even though an organization is corrupt, there are good people trying to be good people in that situation. This is also one of those episodes that, I'm not taking a stand on this particular opinion, but I realize that there are negative opinions about the military in general. And this is one of those stories that says, the military on the whole is a good organization. It's just there are occasionally bad things and bad people that happen in it. And this sort of reinforces that notion, because Earth Force is good. Ben Zane is bad.
Yeah. And talking about the guest cast, this was the last episode produced in the season. So with the remaining budget, they only had 2 prominent guest stars instead of the 4 that they normally had. But there are a couple other people worth noting. One of them is David L. Crowley, who played Lou Welch. He is the bald security officer that they encounter and have a chat with him early on. This is that character's second appearance. He was previously in Survivors, and he will continue to show up. So he was created for that episode, written by Mark Scott Zickery, who was, again, kind and gracious enough to join us for that episode. And with the name, they've used him a couple of times since and will continue to use him. There is one other actor that we have seen before and will see again, but that one is actually best saved for giving form to the dream near the end of this episode.
Okay.
Because it's not a coincidence in who he's playing this time.
I think we're going to say she. Because we do see a portrayal of Ivanova's mother. She has a dream in this episode. And I mentioned it in the recap. So when Ivanova expressed her dislike for the Psi Corps, I kind of imagined that there was like a really negative experience with them in her past. And so to find out that it was not so much resenting a negative as preserving a positive, I just assumed that that's not all there was to it. But the more I think about it, the more I kind of like that. I hope that that's actually the end of that story, because there's so much in female characters' backstories that involves surviving violence that it would be nice to have somebody who's just really passionate about not being hurt because she wants to preserve the positive in her, and that's what gives her strength and her fire about not wanting to be scanned. I kind of like that, actually. That may be the sort of thing you can't speak on.
No, not yet.
Okay, well, it is what it is. The internal investigations people. This is a story trope that gets used a lot in, basically any organization where people are given a lot of lateral leeway in what they can do and what commands they can make. There's usually some bureau or some department that is able to investigate those choices and question them. And they're usually given a lot of freedom to be really nasty in those investigations. Rarely are internal affairs people portrayed as happy, joyful characters. So the notion here that he comes along saying, I have this authority, I have the support of regulations, I have everything behind me. In order to go by the book, you have to listen to me. And they're able to say, actually, in order to go by the book, you're messing up. It was kind of nice, because I feel like that's not the way those stories usually go.
No, and it was good. And you're right. That is at least the way internal investigation or internal affairs are depicted in media. I have an uncle who was part of the local police force for a while, and he did his last couple of years in internal affairs. Yeah, it was interesting. He got the early retirement package because he started in traffic, worked up to homicide, and then because he is a very personable kind of guy, very affable, he ended up working the polygraphs for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But that is so stressful because you have to don't know how much I should really give away in a public podcast, but really when they get to the polygraphs,
that's fine.
They are really trying to get a confession,
mm-hmm.
because polygraphs are often thrown out of court, so it means they're just trying to gather evidence of something that they're convinced of. So you kind of have to act buddy-buddy with some real scumbags.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can, at least with our local police service, if you could make it a full 2 years with them, then you can retire. because that 2 years of stress, they're saying, nope, that's good.
Yeah.
And he didn't quite make the full 2 years, so he spent a few years in the internal affairs before he's able to go. But thankfully, our police service is not like so many that have made the news, and the internal affairs people honestly don't have much to do.
Which is good.
Yeah.
That's the kind of organization you want. If an internal affairs department in an organization is low staffed but not understaffed with little to do, that means you're doing that your organization is fulfilling its mandate properly.
Yeah, internal affairs people should be like emergency responders as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I am perfectly happy to pay people to sit on their butts if they're emergency responders.
Right.
Let's pay enough taxes to make sure that we have more than we need at any given time so that some of them are waiting for a call. And nobody is waiting for a response to a call instead.
So Ben Zane's character, this is an episode storyline that is building upon world building and background plot elements and everything that we have sort of developed over the course of the season. And it's kind of neat because they could not have done this episode in the first half of the year. We don't have enough story information about the universe to do this episode early in the year. It kind of reminds me of the, starting on the 80s or 90s going forward, comics were largely long, protracted stories. But in like the 60s and 70s over at DC, comics were one and done. And so a lot of people say there's no continuity because they're just one and done stories. And yet they build elements into the world and they build background concepts. They build story ideas that later stories can use and build on. And that's what we have going on here. Even though each of these episodes is disconnected to the others as far as actual plots go, they are building a world and they are building a history. And they are giving us background to the characters that can get used in much more in-depth ways. And certainly, I know that we used to do these comparisons a lot. We don't do them as much anymore. I'm going to go ahead and do it now just because early Star Trek did not do this. Early Star Trek The Next Generation, late 20th century Star Trek did not really build on storylines for its first few seasons. And this is doing so in a way that I appreciate it.
Yeah, if you look at, say, Next Generation, which was coming close to its end at this point, having started in 87, it ran 7 seasons. We're now into 94.
Yeah, it's had a finale by this point.
Yeah.
The finale was in May or June.
And yeah, you compare it to that. Next Generation, there's only really continuity. I mean, aside from costume changes, right? When they redesign the uniforms, you can tell which season it is. When Riker grows the beard, you can tell which season it is.
Mm-hmm.
But there's the death of Chasha Yar and the promotion of Worf. There's the promotion of Geordi to chief engineer at the start of season 2. And then beyond that, if you are not dealing with a recurring villain, right? If it's not the next Borg episode or the next lore or the next crystalline entity or the next Q, yeah, the episodes are almost interchangeable until the back half of season 7 when they start to round up plot lines.
Right. And even Q, whenever he appears, those first 3 or 4 appearances, he does a rundown of plot lines.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Remember, I was this guy. This is what I did before. Remember this? Remember this? And yeah, so it's just, whether it's TV in general or Babylon 5 in particular, the storytelling has moved to a new level of continuity.
Yeah, this is one of the first weekly 22 episode season shows that is starting to build continuity. And as we said, this one, it is largely, like you said, that the comics of the 60s and 70s, where once an element is introduced, subsequent stories could be told in almost any order.
Mm-hmm.
This is really the last season of Babylon 5 that's going to feel that way. So we, just tipping our hand a little bit, not plot spoilers, but by the time you get to, say, season 3, there's nothing interchangeable, right? Season 1 here, they really liked Mind War. They liked how Koenig did it, so they moved episode 10 to episode 6 of the broadcast order. You will not be capable of rearranging episodes in season 3 without breaking story elements.
Right, which is very typical of modern TV, but not typical of 1994 TV.
Right, and I think a lot of it was the same reason. Comics changed when the direct market opened, and you could guarantee you get the next issue of that title.
Mm-hmm.
In the 60s, apparently, when you were ordering Marvel Comics, you just ordered X number of Marvel Comics, and you didn't even have the ability to say so many copies of the Avengers and so many Fantastic Four. Marvel just shipped them.
Mm.
as it was, according to the return rates that they had. So people are more likely to return Fantastic Four. They don't include as many issues of Fantastic Four in the next shipment, that kind of thing. That's how they did their setups. With the direct market, you could order X copies of each individual title.
Right.
And then this is showing that, yes, you can have serialized storytelling and not lose an audience. That was the fear, is that if people missed a week, they would never come back. So you would eventually bleed viewers. But Babylon 5, later seasons of Deep Space Nine, and X-Files, both DS9 and X-Files to a lesser degree than Babylon 5, will show that, yes, you can hang on to an audience with serialized storytelling. So as we keep going, we're going to find Babylon 5 ratings get pretty stable, because those who are watching it don't dare to miss it. And that didn't change in general until the early 2000s, and it was the 1-2 punch of the popularity of TV on DVD. It was never super popular on VHS. I think Babylon 5 and Star Trek were the only two series that were profitable being released on VHS. But when they got to DVD, and they were much more compact, right? So you didn't have one tape for 2 episodes. You could have one slim box for a whole season. Then people started buying in and collecting the DVDs.
It took them a while to figure out that packaging. Because remember how the original series was originally packaged? It was single volume cases with 2 episodes on the disc.
Yeah, that was the first TV show to be released on DVD, and they were doing like movie length discs.
Yeah.
The first complete season package was the first season of the X-Files, released in, I think it was early May of the year 2000. And it was what they called the accordion style, but it's not really an accordion. You just unfold the both halves, so when it's laying flat and open, you have all the discs accessible left to right.
And the Next Generation's first box was pretty bulky. It wasn't until the second pass of the Next Generation that they started slimming down their packaging, notably. Because DVD box sets used to be pretty high profile as far as shelf space.
Yep. Some in particular, I really wish we had the European complete series releases of Star Trek in North America. The complete Next Generation came in a board cube. The complete Deep Space Nine came in the station, and all the discs were put in the ring. So it was a very large package, but you have the station.
Very pretty. That would be cool.
Yeah, it wasn't until it was actually Netflix was part of it too, because between the DVDs and then Netflix, then networks were able to calm down and say, okay, you can do more serialized storytelling, because it now became a reasonable assumption that people who heard good things about the show could start with episode 1 and watch in sequence.
Right. And it was not long until you had shows like Lost and Heroes really playing into that. Because we were moving from the very early 2000s with the release of Star Trek on DVD and Star Trek Next Generation on DVD. And then Heroes starts in, 2004? Battlestar Galactica starts around then. Smallville was already going, but it started very episodic. And except for the gradual build of tension in the romantic relationships, it's pretty much interchangeable in its first season. But by the end, of course, it's doing season-long arcs, which I've heard interviews about Deep Space Nine, and the idea of having a 10-part episode at the end of its last season, they almost weren't allowed to do that. Like, they really had to cajole the networks or whoever's in charge to let them do a 10-part season finale.
Yeah, they weren't even supposed to have 3-parters or any serialized storytelling, and it was Ira Steven Behr who took over in late season 2 as the showrunner, continued into season 3. It was like, no, we're not going anywhere. We have to see consequences of the actions. We can't, it's not like the other shows where you could ignore the consequences because they're not at that planet anymore.
Right.
Here we have to cope with it. So he figured it out in season 3 because they had a 2-parter, and they were told you're not allowed to do a 2-parter in the middle, but they really, really wanted to do it. So for the first time in Star Trek history, they didn't have the 2-parter titled Part 1 and Part 2. They had 2 separate names and ran it without saying to be continued at the end of Part 1. They just left it on a cliffhanger, and nobody complained. So they realized, oh, they're not watching. So it was a lot more of getting forgiveness than getting permission from that point on.
The Circle, the second season opener of Deep Space Nine, they did not do parts in their title episodes. I'm not sure whether they had it to be continued at the end of the episode, but it was definitely a 3-part opener that did not say parts 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, it wasn't 1, 2, and 3, but they did have to be continued, it was to be continued and then to be concluded.
Right. That's how I learned what the word concluded means, was from TV. TV taglines at the end of episodes.
But anyway, back on to Babylon 5, which actually started this continuity. And what you're talking about, that phenomenon of the continuity, that's part of what JMS was hoping to see this address, was the fact that people kept saying, well, they're never going to come back to that. They're never going to come back to that, because that is what they had come to expect from television sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been so many other shows that say, no, we're going to be different, that weren't, that they didn't believe JMS when he said it was going to be different. And he remembers, like, literally seeing a post appear on the Genie boards where someone's complaining, oh, they're never going to mention, like, Ragash 3 or this incident or that incident. And as JMS was watching the East Coast feed, or, the timing for the East Coast feed, that post was made literally 2 minutes after Ben Zane mentioned all of those incidents. The guy was saying, we'll never hear from these again.
Right.
So, yeah, part of it was to say, no, this stuff is going to matter. And it absolutely does. That's not a shift. They were just making it a little more explicit early on, saying, no, we're not going to forget this stuff.
Yeah.
Right down to the point that when Ivanova storms off and she says to Garibaldi, you once offered to buy me a drink, I could use it. That was from way early in the season. He offered to buy her a drink when she was using the gold channels to talk to her dying father.
Mm-hmm.
It was the end of that episode where he made the offer. And she just says, yeah, you did this once. Let's go. And if you were paying attention to the details, you'd know, oh, that is a reference to what's come before.
Right. But it's not just random dialogue.
Right. You could be watching this for the first time and go, okay, this stuff happened, and not necessarily expect that offer of a drink ever actually happened on screen.
In one of the early scenes with Ben Zane, because one of the things I didn't really mention in the recap is that Ben Zane recruits Garibaldi pretty quickly and sort of, help him around the station. In one of their early conversations, before we have found out that he's an investigations officer, he offers Garibaldi a drink. And of course, and I know that Garibaldi is an alcoholic, and so he stays off the stuff. So whenever Garibaldi turns down the drink, and he's like, oh, okay, good, because, alcohol makes a man weak if you don't, if you use it improperly. Then he reveals that he's an investigations officer, and my first reaction was, oh, okay, so he was actually testing Garibaldi's reserve against the alcohol. That's the kind of thing that an investigations officer might do. It's not underhanded. It's a little underhanded, but it also seems a bit reasonable for his position. So that kind of thing left me with not a bad taste in my mouth towards the officer. It's when everything got really nasty later on that I realized, oh, this guy's not good.
Yeah, it's questionable, but if that was the only questionable thing, it would have gone under the radar.
Right.
Because you could look at it as saying, he's about to recruit this guy. Is he going to be reliable?
Right. I've got to know if I can trust this guy. And so since I know he has problems with alcohol, is he going to give into those problems easily? Oh, look, he's not. Like I said, it's not a great move, but it almost seems understandable given his position.
Mm-hmm.
What else in this? Sinclair was amazing as usual. Just the way he manipulated the rules that were supposedly being manipulated against him was something that I liked. I feel like they didn't quite directly address the relationship between the fact that the Joint Chiefs of Staff were sponsoring this investigation, but also the investigation was largely fueled by revenge. So I'm not entirely sure how those connect, and I don't know if that's like a giving form to the dream, a question I'm supposed to be asking that we're going to come back to later.
I think it was a matter of opportunity. So yeah, there's giving form to the dream elements there, but there were two different motivations at play. Yes, so the Joint Chiefs have one motivation because of things that are building in one direction, and Bester took an opportunity of that to fulfill his own agenda, which is not necessarily the same agenda that the Joint Chiefs had.
One of the background elements that was brought in a few times was how things are heating up on Mars, which is good because it's really cold there. But I couldn't remember. I didn't look up the details. What all do we know so far about the hostilities on Mars?
So really there is a separatist movement. They feel that EarthGov is taking more than they're giving. So they're unsettled and want to stand out and be their own independent country rather than a colony, or independent state rather than a colony of Earth. And a lot of that seems to be driven by racism.
Yeah, I was going to say, are they tied into the, Humanity First? I forget the name of the terrorist organization we've seen before.
Yeah, they're active there, so it's not directly tied to them, but they will sympathize with them. It's more like the IRA in Ireland in the 80s, where they are not officially sanctioned, but public opinion is varied.
Gotcha.
And quite divided. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just couldn't remember what all we'd seen on that point. Trying to think what else was in this. Whenever Bill Mumy came into the show, I don't know if we mentioned this because I realized it recently and I was like, oh yeah, of course. But he was the Lost in Space boy.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that.
We did talk about that? Okay.
Yeah, I remember getting accidentally spoiled about the role he has in the new Lost in Space when we were talking about that.
Oh, that's right. I remember that conversation now. Okay. Yeah, I had forgotten that we made that connection because I remade it recently. Because that's how my memory works, kids. I forget stuff and then relearn it. But that was just kind of neat because it was on an episode of From Crisis to Crisis because he was in an episode of Superboy. And they were talking about how he's one of those child actors who managed to also be successful as an adult actor, which is not as common with child actors. I think it's maybe more common now, or maybe there are just a lot more isolated incidents that stand out, but isolated instances, not incidents. But yeah, seeing him here has been kind of fun. He was on a Superboy episode, and remembering that he was and I tried watching Lost in Space when I was doing a lot of classic sci-fi 60s stuff, and I didn't get like more than 5 episodes in. I got kind of bored with it. I don't know if that makes me unusual or not, but
the first few episodes where it was kind of serialized, I found quite engaging, but then after that, it was definitely aimed at a younger audience than the original Star Trek, which was on at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I got the complete series for $30, and I found it starts strong, but once they're on the planet, it's not the ensemble show it was intended as. It's the Will Robinson, Dr. Smith show.
Mm.
And it can get pretty goofy.
The serialization of the early episodes was also something I remember really enjoying, and that faded after about 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah, because what Irwin Allen did, he knew that you can get bigger budgets for pilots to kick things off than the rest. So the actual pilot he used to sell the show was very compressed, very high-paced, and then when they got the go-ahead, he took the footage from that pilot and spliced it into 5 or 6 other episodes that were made on the cheap.
Okay.
So he spread out one really compressed story over the first 4 or 5 in a serialized format. And that's why they were serialized, because it really was one big story with details added. And then after that, it was different episode every week.
So it wasn't experimental TV by making a serialized story. It was, let's turn our long episode into a cheap way to make more TV.
Yeah, it was let's increase the profitability. So it's almost like Star Trek recovered the funds of the cage by splicing it into the menagerie when they were running low on cash. But this was Irwin Allen's plan from the start.
All right.
And speaking of Bill Mumy, he has also had success as a musician these days.
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, he got a bit of a talking to from JMS about using Babylon 5 to promote things.
Oh.
Because
he's like, I'm Bill Mumy from Babylon 5?
No, because the chant that Lanier does in this episode is unscripted, and that random gibberish was the title of one of their albums.
Okay. That's clever, though. You got to give him props for that.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where, on the one hand, I get why JMS was upset. On the other hand, I'm not upset with Bill Mumy about it either. I think it's funny. And I can't say I wouldn't take the same opportunity if the situation arose.
Right.
Aside from the fact that no one wants to listen to music I'm making because I am
not a musician.
No, I made it to the grade 4 in piano, and I haven't played in 30 years. So, yeah.
One of my friends tells a story about how they were in the choir in either elementary or middle school, probably middle school, and the choir director intentionally put them on the back row and asked them to sing more quietly.
Okay.
Because he didn't want them to not be in the choir, but also didn't want to hear them. Which it's an interesting way to try to avoid squishing a child's dreams.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to think of, I don't know what else I have for this episode. It was neat to see Lanier without Delenn. And every time we go to an episode where like most of the ambassadors don't appear, I remember what you said about how they only appear, what'd you say, 9 times for the course of the entire season? 8 times for the course of the entire season?
Yeah, I think it was 8 times in this first season. And as the last one in the production order, with all these, they were literally saying, who do we have left? And I suspect Lanier was still available because early on, they cut his first appearance for length. So when we see him first coming onto the station and Delenn is saying, oh, okay, let me get caught up, and they're walking away and he's filling things in, and then after the scene was done, but when they kept rolling, he said, well, Pete Delaney is making a comeback and ad-lib stuff like that. That scene was supposed to be his only scene in that episode. And then they ended up cutting it for length, so he had 1 episode left. So that scene was bumped into another one where he had other moments. So, he still got paid for it there, but the contract says you appear in so many. He hadn't appeared yet.
Gotcha.
So I think that's why he was still available here.
Well, it works, and he's charming. I like him, and I really, really liked his last scene with Garibaldi, when Garibaldi's reactions to the motorcycle are so mixed, and he kind of goes back and forth. Because every time he says something slightly snarky, Lanier takes it totally sincerely and just gets like downcast eyes. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. And it's just like, I can relate to that. I feel that. I understand exactly what those emotions are like. But then having Garibaldi reaffirm him and take him in as a friend and go bike riding with him, that was really cool. I wasn't entirely sure what kind of comedic stuff was going to happen after Lanier saw the thing about bikes being sexual prowess and masculinity, because he keyed in on that. And I was like, oh no, Lanier, what are you going to do? But they didn't really do anything with it. It was just a nice little moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just acknowledging what some people have viewed our motorcycles as.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cultural thing. Not everyone thinks that way, but it's definitely a cultural thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is Eyes.
Yeah, so should we do our last best hope for the standout character moment before we do Giving Form to the Dream?
If you have nothing else on Eyes, then we should do the last best hope character moment before we move on to Giving to the Dream. So I was thinking about this, and I think I'm going to give this to Gray. I think that Harriman Gray, as a character in this, who is obviously conflicted about his role, who is trying to let people know, hey, I'm here, but I don't like it. And I'm not going to transcend my mandate. I'm not going to go beyond what I have to do, but also I have a job that I have to do, and it sucks. Combine that with just the way he portrays the personality of the character as unassuming, affable, a little bit reticent and introverted, and his interactions with Ivanova and the way he handles Ivanova's anger and resentment without getting angry and resentful back. So much about Gray's character I really, really liked. And it's part Combs's portrayal, because Combs is amazing, but it's also just the way it was written. Both of those really go together to make a memorable character. And I don't know if he's going to come back or not, but I liked him a lot.
Yeah, he was great. My choice for the character moment involves Gray, but it's actually Ivanova. When you make Ivanova angry, she can express herself in very unique ways. And to me, the line that stood out was telling Harriman that if he scans her at any time, she will twist off his head at the neck and use it as a chamber pot.
Which was fantastic, because you don't normally have women using urination as a threat. It's just for obvious biological reasons, a guy relieving himself on you is just something that has a visual connection to it that women don't have. But yeah, she's totally going to, yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, that's the thing with Ivanova. When she makes a threat, she's going to stand by it. So it was a toss-up between that and the scene in the bar when she's been drinking and someone hits on her and she is not interested, but the guy doesn't know how to take no for an answer. And you see her head coming up to face this gentleman, It cuts away, and then by the time it comes back, you're wondering how many of these guys has she beaten the crap out of it at this point.
And it's not one of those things where, like, you're in the subway and somebody's hitting on Oracle, Barbara Gordon, and it goes dark, and when things are back on, everyone's on their knees or on the ground, and Barbara Gordon rolls away. Because you're like, how exactly did that happen? But it's Barbara Gordon, so, whatever. She's a badass. There's no question about how Ivanova could take these guys down. Like, she could, we believe it. We know it can happen. We've seen her. Yeah.
Yeah, you know when that guy comes up to hit on her that it's not going to end well for him. The question is just, how long will he be in the medical bay? That's the only question, is the duration of his hospital stay.
So now we come to the one of my favorite segments of the episode that we do, or the show that we do, which is called Giving Form to the Dream. Now, this is where all of you spoiler-scared people can relax, because we are not going to be talking about future episode developments. We're just talking about developments from this episode that you might want to stick a pin in, try to remember, not forget, because they will come back. So what are some things from the episode?
All right. So you've already mentioned things are escalating in Mars Colony.
Mm-hmm.
That will be relevant. We know that Bester has not forgiven Sinclair. That's going to be relevant. We know that people within the Joint Chiefs are okay with them trying to oust Sinclair. That's going to be relevant. Well, this one, we were talking about why Ivanova was so opposed to a scan. Everything she said was true, but it's not the complete truth.
Okay.
So we have this. Now, we also have, as I said, one of the guest stars is one that's best left for giving form to the dream. During Ivanova's dream sequence, or next to her mother, were people in comedy and tragedy masks.
Now, I was thinking that one of those was Combs. It sounded like him, but I wasn't sure.
No, neither was Combs. The person who played comedy does not appear in the series again. That's Drew Letchworth. But the actor playing tragedy is Macaulay Bruton. This is the fourth time we have seen him. He has been Garibaldi's aide that we have seen in Mind War and The Sky Full of Stars and By Any Means Necessary. We have not seen the last of him, and casting him as tragedy is not random.
Interesting. I almost wonder, since we didn't see his face, if that would count as spoilery.
It is something that's in the credits.
It's in the credits. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the eagle-eyed person would notice this. So, okay. So not a spoiler, just an Easter egg.
Yeah. And then I think the other one that stands out is when Gray and Ivanova were talking while Ivanova was eating. When Gray mentioned Psychor, he also mentions that the thought of Talia Winters jumped out a lot in her mind.
Yes, and I had to look up to make sure that was what I thought it was. So that is our resident Psychor representative on the station. She thinks about her in relation to Psychor.
Yeah.
We haven't seen her in a while, have we?
No, we haven't. Yeah, the plot lines are coming.
Okay. All right. Well, very cool. I did not remember whatever it was that popped in my head earlier. That might have been a giving form to the dream question, but that's okay. All right. So I guess that brings us to what we're doing next week. So as I bring up my episode listing here.
Next week we'll be dealing with Legacies. So this is one that's written by DC Fontana.
Okay. Yeah, it just came up on my screen. I was about to say that. Okay. So Legacies is DC Fontana, who is, of course, of Star Trek fame. That is Dorothy Fontana, who used a gender-neutral writing credit because patriarchy in the 60s.
Yes. She previously contributed to the series with The War Prayer. That was episode 7. The arranged marriage that Londo helped people get around with Danica McKellar. And that Legacies is also the last episode of the season not written by J. Michael Straczynski.
Okay.
So the 5 episodes that follow are all JMS scripts.
Gotcha. And we are nearing the end. We are in the last leg of the season. So we are barreling toward, well, I say that, there is the gap before the finale, but we'll get to there when we get to that. As far other than that episode, we are barreling towards the end of the season.
Yeah, we will have no gaps until that finale is the last episode we have.
So
Right.
we'll run through episode 21 on a weekly basis.
Okay. So, when we get to those production gaps, we like to run special episodes during the intermediate space. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me. This next big space is where we're going to have more than just a feedback episode, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so we will have more than just our usual feedback. We will save the exact details of that for later, but we do like your feedback. And so there are a variety of ways to get in touch with us. Blaine, how can they reach out to us?
One way that a lot of find fairly easy is to send us an email to Babylon5 30 years later at gmail.com. Use letters or numerals for those numbers. We've got all 4 email addresses.
You can also leave comments on our websites. The first website is my own, which is johnreadscomics.com. Remember, there is no H in, I was going to say no H in anything, but anything does have an H in it. So never mind. You can leave comments there for any episode. You can also check out other podcasts that I'm doing over there.
You can also leave comments where this is cross-posted at Bureau42.com, which is the home of my own podcasts.
And you can leave reviews on your podcatcher of choice. Now, we know how to check Apple Podcasts for reviews, and we'll do that on a regular basis. But if you want to leave a review on another podcatcher because there's something you like more than Apple Podcasts, fantastic, because I am all about opposing monopolies. Just let us know if you would like to have acknowledgement of your review. We would love to do so on the air. Just drop us a line through one of the other vehicles of communication to let us know you left a review. We will go find it and read it and thank you for it on the air.
Right. And the last place that you can leave comments is on our YouTube channel. So we've got the Babylon 5 30 years later handle on YouTube. Everything is cross-posted there with just a simple visualizer. So you can leave comments there, and those will also be read in our feedback episodes.
Until next time, thank you all very much for listening.
And good eating to you.